Switch 2 supports backward compatibility. You can still enjoy many of the classic titles that were released on the original Switch. In particular, some games receive Switch 2 specific patches that significantly improve resolution and frame rate. Even for titles without patches, games that use variable frame rates can leverage Switch 2's stronger hardware to improve overall quality. In those cases, games that hovered around 30 FPS on Switch often deliver near stable performance, close to 60 FPS on Switch 2. However, the Switch's low rendering resolution is hard to improve without a patch. Some titles with dynamic resolution may look a bit better on Switch 2, but the improvement is much less noticeable than the frame rate gains. In fact, even during the Switch era, the low-quality graphics caused by hardware limitations were often criticized, and the issue became even more pronounced in docked mode, where output devices were more fragmented. Some companies released products claiming to improve the image quality of the Switch's docked mode, offering solutions to enhance the visuals. The best-known examples are the M Classic from Marseille and the 4K Gamer Pro from PhotoFast. These HDMI dongles upscale output, with the M Classic supporting up to 1440p and the 4K Gamer Pro going up to 4K. Let's take a quick look at how these devices work. The console generates the final video output signal and sends it through an HDMI cable to a display device like a TV, where it appears on the panel. Now, when you try to connect an upscaler, its physical size prevents it from fitting directly into the dock's HDMI slot. Because of this, you'll need to use the included HDMI extension cable or an HDMI switch to extend the connection outside the dock before you can hook it up to your display. Once connected this way, the output signal from the console is passed through the device's internal chip and processed again. During this step, each upscaler applies its own proprietary method of image enhancement and upscaling before sending the final signal to the display. The connection method is the same for both the M Classic and the 4K Gamer Pro. So, how effective are these upscalers in practice? Before we dive into side-by-side comparisons, let's first check the baseline output with no devices connected. We'll compare how the same game looks in docked mode on both Switch and Switch 2. Through this comparison, we'll see whether Switch 2's built-in upscaling actually improves image quality when running the same content. The first game is Fire Emblem Three Houses. Released in July 2019, it's a flagship tactical role-playing for Nintendo and one of the best-selling entries in the series. Because the game's exploration segments don't feature day-night cycles or weather changes, it's a good fit for consistent comparisons. As you can see, our captured footage isn't perfectly frame-aligned, so a truly precise comparison is tricky. But to the naked eye, there isn't a striking difference in image quality between Switch and Switch 2. Next up is Super Mario RPG. The original launched on the Super Nintendo in 1996 and drew attention as a collaboration between Square and Nintendo. In 2023, it was remade with full 3D graphics, delighting many longtime fans. Right now, you're watching the clip without explicit annotations, but we're actually alternating captured footage from Switch and Switch 2 every second in the edit. This can make the timing feel slightly off, yet the graphical difference is still minimal. In conclusion, even when running Switch games in 4K output on the Switch 2, you don't see any dramatic graphical improvements. That's because the console is simply stretching a 1080p image to fill a 4K display. Upscaling in this form just multiplies existing pixels and fills in the gaps by blending neighboring pixel colors. It's a standard interpolation method. Without official high-resolution patches or advanced upscalers like DLSS or FSR that add brand new detail, the result can't go beyond making the 1080p image appear smoother at best. So, let's take a look at the devices that aim to improve visuals without patches: the M Classic and the 4K Gamer Pro. Both the M Classic and the 4K Gamer Pro are easy to use with no special setup, but each device has a small switch that lets you adjust certain settings. First, on the M Classic, the LED color changes depending on the side switch position. When it's off, the device doesn't operate. When the green light is on, image enhancement and upscaling are enabled. The blue light adds a fixed 4:3 aspect ratio on top of the usual enhancement. Since most Switch games run at 16:9, I'll use the green enhancement on mode for this test. The 4K Gamer Pro doesn't switch modes. Instead, it has a button that adjusts the strength of its image processing. Each press brightens the indicator light and increases the enhancement level from 20%, 50%, while 100%. Pressing once more at 100% turns the light off and disables processing. I'll run it at 100%. There is one drawback. While the Switch 2 can output 4K, the M Classic maxes out at 1440p. It technically supports 4K output, but only at 30 Hz, which isn't practical for console gaming. So on the Switch, its effective ceiling is 1440p, assuming your display supports it. If your 4K TV doesn't accept 1440p input, it falls back to 1080p. On my own TV, it defaults to 1080p. To work around this, I'll use an EDID dongle that forces 1440p output. These aren't easy to find these days, but I recently ordered one from AliExpress just for this test. This way, we can compare 1080p versus 1440p quality directly. Personally, I've used the M Classic with a 4K TV before and didn't worry much about whether it was really 1080p or 1440p. That's because I usually combined the M Classic with the 4K Gamer Pro, outputting at 4K together, a combination that's been popular and well tested. As for the hookup, you can't plug them directly together because the M Classic's USB power lead gets in the way, so just use an HDMI extension cable between them. As you'll see in the test footage, the M Classic feels like it focuses on anti-aliasing based image cleanup, while the 4K Gamer Pro sharpens the image for added clarity. Used together, the 4K Gamer Pro crisps up the smoother image coming from the M Classic, resulting in very pleasing image quality. Of course, the combined price easily exceeds $200, so it's hard to recommend purely on cost. Still, since it's a combo I used throughout the Switch era, I'll add it to the tests alongside the 4K Gamer Pro. I'll be adding one more device to the test, my favorite high-end scaler, the RetroTink 4K Pro. It supports almost every retro console input, and with its scanline and mask features, it recreates the look of CRT displays on a 4K TV. It's the best for retro gaming, but at over 3 times the price of the other two upscalers combined. I can't recommend it just for the Switch. Still, since I already have one, I'll include it in this test. The RetroTink 4K Pro can load various presets via SD card, and you can download configurations from the internet as well. To keep the test consistent, I'll use an existing preset. Go to the Nintendo Switch directory, then into the Pramzerod HDMI folder, and select Nintendo Switch. Comparing this to the base output, honestly, it looks almost identical. Despite being the most expensive scaler, it doesn't deliver the kind of dramatic changes seen with the M Classic or 4K Gamer Pro. A bit disappointing, but the reason is clear. The M Classic and 4K Gamer Pro are designed to enhance modern games their chips process and modify the image to make it look sharper or smoother than the original. By contrast, the RetroTink 4K Pro is focused on accurate signal conversion, especially for retro analog sources like 240p or 480p. It digitizes low-res signals without distortion and scales them cleanly by exact pixel multiples. For digital outputs like the Switch or Switch 2, it doesn't apply major image enhancements. That's why the result looks nearly identical to the console's native output. It's not really necessary for this test, but since I've already mentioned it, I'll also show the RetroTink's unique CRT-style features, scanlines, and masks so you can see how Switch gameplay looks with a retro CRT vibe. Just think of this as a fun extra rather than a serious comparison. Now, let's begin the tests. Fire Emblem Three Houses is the first comparison game. When I first recorded it, I simply placed the character in one spot and switched output modes to capture footage. But in actual gameplay, characters and backgrounds are constantly moving and changing. So, to better show the difference under real play conditions, I added another capture card and recorded the footage simultaneously. However, for the sake of comparison, I had to lock the Switch 2 output at 2160p, and this caused an issue where the upscaler could not properly recognize the signal. To solve this, one side was forced into a 1080p signal using EDID and then connected to the upscaler. As a note, when you use an upscaler yourself, you should set the Switch 2's output to 1080p.
そういえば
見えた。
強い。次は負けませんからね。
どうかしら。
よし。
僕が負けるなんて。模擬戦とはいえ腹立たしい。
ごめんなさい、隙があったから。
The next game is Bayonetta 3, released in October 2022. It features a distinctive art style and flashy action, but was often criticized for performance issues due to the hardware limits of the original Switch. On Switch 2, even without a patch, the hardware's higher performance allows for a much smoother experience. Now let's see how much the upscaler can further enhance the graphics. Now we have Pikmin 4. Released in July 2023, it is the latest entry in the series and is widely praised for its clean visuals and stable optimization among Switch titles. However, games that are already this well optimized on the original hardware often gain little benefit from Switch 2's higher performance. It's the kind of game you would expect to receive a Switch 2 optimization patch, but strangely, it never appeared in the update list. Even so, since the game runs at 900p in docked mode, I included it in the test to see if the upscaler could make the picture just a bit sharper. Next is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. A game once thought impossible to run on the Switch finally arrived in October 2019. Visual downgrades were inevitable, but given the hardware limitations, it was still regarded as a very successful port. Especially in handheld mode, the Switch became the lightest device capable of playing The Witcher 3, which was a major strength. However, in docked mode, its weaknesses became more apparent. In fact, it was often better to use the cloud save function and continue on a more powerful system rather than playing in docked mode. For that reason, there was little reason to play it in docked mode. Still, it represents some of the highest level visuals achievable on the Switch, which is why I decided to include it in this test. Interestingly, The Witcher 3 is unusual for a console game in that it actually has graphics settings. The footage you're watching here was tested under the settings I chose.
이 새끼가 보고 다녀. 폐하 만지고 나발이고. 가자. 와, 그렇지. 자, 진정해. 가자. 에이랴. 오늘도 일꾼이 절반 많았네. 이번에는 어떤 피? 홀린 듯이 연분이 나오고 있지. 회장님, 이제 영웅이야.
자유도시 노비그라드에서 자유로운 건 인간뿐이죠.
처맞고 싶어 환장했냐? 고맙네 게롤트. 이는 저 대자식 못 잡았을 거야. 의심과 괴로움이 공존하는 사람께 있어서 그게 네 결말이다. 괴물 새끼야. 저 자식 면상 정말 흉물스러. 일반인들이랑 술집에 섞여들게 이 아들 요스트를 위하여 아버지의 지혜를 잇기를. 모두 페달원이 되라.
Now let's look at Yoshi's Crafted World. This platformer, released in March 2019, features a cute and handcrafted art style. Visually, it feels somewhat similar to Pikmin, but since it targets 60 frames per second, it relies heavily on dynamic resolution. As a result, even in docked mode, it struggles to maintain 720p, making it another title badly in need of a Nintendo patch. Before diving into the upscaler comparison, I'll first show you captures from both the original Switch and the Switch 2. In the same scene, the Switch 2 output looks noticeably sharper. Zooming into areas with aliasing shows that the Jaggies are smaller on Switch 2. This proves that the internal rendering resolution is higher on Switch 2, since Yoshi's Crafted World uses dynamic resolution that scales with hardware performance. Even without a patch, the game runs at a higher resolution on Switch 2. Unlike Fire Emblem Three Houses or Super Mario RPG, which showed little difference, Yoshi's Crafted World clearly demonstrates performance-based improvements, so I wanted to highlight it separately. Now, let's check out how it looks with the upscaler applied. So far, I've tested a total of 5 Switch games with upscalers. These are all unpatched titles running at either 720p or 1080p, excluding the RetroTink 4K Pro. Both the M Classic and 4K Gamer Pro showed noticeable improvements over the Switch 2's default output. That said, spending a significant amount of money on upscalers just to slightly enhance visuals in older games doesn't seem like a great investment. But if these devices can also enhance newer Switch 2 games, that could give them more value. From here, I'll move on to testing games that have received Switch 2 optimization patches, as well as titles developed specifically for Switch 2. The next game is Pokémon Violet, released in November 2022. On the original Switch, even considering its hardware limitations, the graphics looked underwhelming, and performance issues only made things worse. But with the release of Switch 2, a long-awaited optimization update was finally delivered. Frame rates became much smoother and resolution improved significantly, though the textures remain unchanged, which is still a bit disappointing. It's not a dedicated Switch 2 edition, but now that it has been patched, we can see how well the upscaler works in this environment. Now for The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. As the sequel to Breath of the Wild, this game launched in May 2023 and quickly became a masterpiece, praised by both fans and critics. Still, like its predecessor, it was commonly criticized for low frame rates and resolution due to the Switch's limited performance. With the launch of Switch 2, both Zelda titles received optimization patches, bringing higher resolution and a stable 60 FPS, allowing players to re-experience these masterpieces in much better form. From the Switch 2 edition onward, many titles now render above 1080p, making external upscalers less necessary. However, one of the goals of this video is to see whether these devices still provide any additional image enhancement on Switch 2 games. So let's take a look. Next is the most recent title released at the time of recording, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Star-Crossed World, a Switch 2 edition. This version improves both graphics and performance while adding new stages. It wasn't originally on my test list, but since it launched right as I was recording gameplay, I impulsively decided to include it. Now let's talk about Cyberpunk 2077. Even on high-end PCs, this game is often used for benchmarking hardware. So just like how The Witcher 3 stunned people when it arrived on Switch, Cyberpunk launching as a Switch 2 title showcased the console's capabilities. Of course, the visuals can't compete with other consoles or PCs, but being able to play a game of this scale in handheld mode is an impressive experience. Docked mode is comparatively less competitive against other platforms, but if the upscaler does its job, it might help narrow the gap.
This is Kang Tao. This is intelligence.
어디 손을 대?
¡Te lo mereces, perra!
넌 뒤졌어!
녀석을 갈갈이 찢어버려!
내가 그랬잖아.
Finally, the last game is Donkey Kong Bonanza, the second first-party exclusive for Switch 2, released on July 17, 2025. It marks the return of a 3D Donkey Kong for the first time in 26 years, since Donkey Kong 64. At the time of making this video, it's probably the most recent first-party Switch 2 release. Nearly every background and object in the game is destructible, delivering fast-paced and exhilarating action. Overall optimization is quite good, making the game enjoyable to play, though the later boss fights still suffer from severe frame drops. Unlike Cyberpunk, Donkey Kong Bonanza has no direct comparisons, so its base graphics are generally acceptable. Still, I wanted to see if the upscaler could make the visuals look even better, so let's test it now. tested 10 games on the Switch 2 using the upscalers that had been used during the Switch era. M Classic is an image correction device that smooths outlines and reduces jagged edges, giving Switch games a cleaner look. This type of correction especially matches well with cell shading graphics, such as Fire Emblem Three Houses, where the outlines are very distinct. However, in games that already have good anti-aliasing or realistic graphics, the correction effect is not very noticeable. Switch games could see some effect from M Classic, but Switch 2 games already have output resolutions that are higher than or equal to M Classic, because it cannot output in 4K, and its image correction has little effect on the Switch 2. I do not feel much need for it there. 4K Gamer Pro, on the other hand, makes the image sharper. Everything becomes clearer and more defined, but jagged edges also become clearer, so it does not match well with cell shading games where outlines are emphasized. However, since it also increases the sharpness of textures, it works quite well with realistic graphics. And the cleaner the game image is, the stronger the effect becomes. M Classic cannot output beyond 1440p because of HDMI limitations, and on Switch 2 games, which already have good anti-aliasing and higher resolution, it had almost no effect. In contrast, 4K Gamer Pro supports 4K output and also makes Switch 2 games appear sharper. This was an unexpected finding in my test. During the Switch era, I thought the sharpening was too strong to use it alone, but on the Switch 2, if you only play Switch 2 games, you can see enough effect by using only the 4K Gamer Pro. The combination of M Classic and 4K Gamer Pro also showed good results on both Switch and Switch 2. 4K Gamer Pro, which usually emphasizes jagged edges, is balanced by M Classic's smoothing, so it outputs a sharp 4K image without jaggeds. Because of the strong correction, the image may look somewhat unnatural, and whether you like it or not will depend on personal preference. Still, among upscalers, this combination shows the most noticeable effect. On the Switch 2, however, the combination of M Classic and 4K Gamer Pro did not show much difference compared to using the 4K Gamer Pro alone. This seems to be because M Classic has little effect on the Switch 2. We checked whether the upscalers that were used on the Switch are still worth using on the Switch 2. M Classic showed its limits. 4K Gamer Pro was usable, and the combination of the two also seemed usable. However, this would only be worthwhile if you already own them. The improvement is not significant enough to justify spending extra money on them. I also tested them only because I already had them, and I would not have purchased them just to use on the Switch 2. The Switch 2 itself shows a fairly decent image compared to the original Switch, so upscalers are only an additional option. In summary, upscalers definitely have an effect, and for those who value sharpness and UI readability, they can be an attractive option. But if the visible difference does not feel large enough for the cost, or if you prefer the natural tone of the original image, I do not think there is a need to invest in them. I hope this video helped you understand the role and the limitations of upscalers. Thank you for watching.